What is the scariest thing you have seen while camping in the forest? During college that was located away from major cities, the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyalsock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on an extended backpacking trip. A 50-plus mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I am an Eagle Scout who has spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before me, you get used to the minor spooky things happening. Coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail and, being Pennsylvania where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off of the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people or people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off of the trail where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It is the fall semester, so leaves are on the ground, the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time when I would hear my friend turn over in his sleep. Then, I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100 plus meters away. I check my watch, 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We are 20 miles in. I slowly get out of my sleeping bag, slowly unzip my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path, they are walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, an impossibility for the long hike they were 1/3 of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring wood cutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it is my only way of defending myself, I am more disheveled than I ever have been, especially knowing that a knife is barely defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what felt like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they are doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we had only a few extra Mountain House, MRE style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following: "We don't use lights, we know where the trail is, it is better to hike late at night." Unnerved at this point, my friend asks them to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we do not. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts making sure that they didn't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got real sleep. By the afternoon, when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. About 2 weeks later I learned that 3 people had been murdered at around the same time and same area that we were in. To this day I wonder if those people were the culprits of it. Just the thought that me and my friend might have escaped death by maybe giving them some food? If it was them, I wonder why they skipped over us? How did they find us? There are just too many questions I have because the situation just didn't make sense at all, and it sometimes keeps me up at night to this day. I have never had something as weird as that happen in the woods and hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I have never been back to Loyalsock Trail. People who have died then been resuscitated. What do you remember seeing? Just before my 18th birthday during the summer after graduating high school I was tearing around on a 3-wheeler with friends. This old trike was not cared for by the owners but I didn't know that, so I was doing my best to whiz around just as fast as the newer quads I was riding with. I broke off from the group and ended up hitting a slight bump and forcing the pins holding the front axle to the frame to shear in two, thus rendering the trike into 2 entirely separate pieces. The image in your mind may now be me with my ass falling behind on the main portion of the trike whilst my front, still grasping to the handlebars in disbelief, is falling forward causing a rift in my seating position. The handlebars bounced up and struck just below my voice box, effectively internally severing my trachea. I fell to the ground and was promptly run over by the back half of the trike, which broke my leg and ended up being the boring part of the story. In shock I stood and tried to call for help, but as those of you paying attention may have surmised, I was unable to force air past my voice box due to the crushed/severed windpipe, and I eventually fell over into a more or less fetal position. When they found me and gathered around while waiting for paramedics to arrive, a 15 minutes chopper flight, I accepted my fate. I was about to die. I told those friends and family around me that I loved them and my time had come. Goodbye. Once paramedics arrived I described to them that my collarbone had broken and went through my windpipe and out the back of my neck, even though there was no external injury. They, being paramedics, did what they were trained to do and got me on a stretcher and used a BVM in an attempt to get oxygenated air into my body. This failed as they did not have any inkling that the air had no guidance system and simply filled up my body cavity. Eventually I was on a helicopter and then I passed out. From here there are 2 stories to tell, the one that I experienced, and the one that occurred through others' experiences. My own first. I died. As I was fading, I had the realization that death was imminent and thought, aren't I supposed to see a tunnel and light and all that nonsense? Then it happened. I saw the tunnel and light. Only after I made the realization of what was occurring and connected it to our culturally normative thoughts behind what happens at the time of death. Was I really seeing the tunnel? This has led me to recognize how ingrained cultural beliefs are and how far they can be from reality. Memory fades, but this has lasted vividly for many years since its occurrence. As has been mentioned, the feeling of complete oneness with all of existence was my main perception. That the self is not me or I, but rather one is many or all is one. There is actually a Family Guy sketch where they are stuck in purgatory that gives a decent visual example, and it is simply white nothingness. Except not nothingness, but simply an all-encompassing light. That was it for me. There was no concept of time or space, just existence along with the whole of everything, including the number 42. What happened in the living world was this: the chopper took me towards a large urban medical center, 45 minutes flight, but when the technicians realized I wouldn't make it that far, they turned around and went to the small local hospital. There, a team of surgeons couldn't figure out what was wrong, so one bright young lad decided to slice open my chest and figure it out in order to save my life, which was quickly drifting away. At this point my blood oxygen count was well below normal and brain death was a real possibility. There they found a mess of torn trachea and did a quick fix by sticking a tube in and shipping me off to a different medical center, where I spent the next 6 hours in intensive surgery with a team of doctors who were prepared to break my chest and ribs to get at my collapsed trachea, which would inevitably recoil behind my heart, as the trachea is like a stretched spring inside your chest. Drainage tubes for my lungs were installed, which I still proudly show as Jesus scars, as were a host of balloons to keep my lungs and trachea from collapsing. I spent a week in a coma and another so doped up that I saw golden retrievers dancing with purple hippos in the ICU. It was an exciting and terrifying hospital stay for the next 30 days. Since my family was told I died, would be brain damaged, maybe a vegetable, etc. while I was asleep, you can understand there were, and still are, some strong feelings regarding the incident. However, when I was told I would need a tube in my neck to breathe the rest of my life and therefore would not be able to swim again, I promptly said fuck that shit and made up my mind to recuperate. Although I was still high enough to wonder why I couldn't just swim backstroke and keep the tube out of the water. Within 12 months I was competing in college nationals and now race Ironmans, always showing off my scars. When did jealousy get the best of your significant other? My husband got jealous because a customer with Down syndrome at my restaurant only wants me to serve him every day. It ruined my marriage. I have been married to my husband for about 2 years. Together for 5. We have 2 children, and I honestly couldn't be happier, until my husband found out about the customer. I run a cafe with my sister and it's located in a very popular neighborhood with lots of office workers. There's also some type of day center. This day center is for people with different kinds of disabilities. They do simpler types of work. There's a boy who is maybe 25 to 30 with Down syndrome that works there. Every morning, his taxi drops him off at 7:30 and he comes to our cafe and gets a breakfast and coffee and sits on the same table facing my workstation. He doesn't say much, just smiles and asks how I am today and what my plans are. He refuses when my sister or one of the girls helps him. It must be me. If I'm busy, he waits until I'm available. Then he starts his day at 8. We close at 4 p.m. and at 3:30 p.m., he comes again and sits on the same table until his taxi comes around 4, and usually I give him a soda or a smoothie on the house. Apparently when I'm not working he gets very confused, stays for a while without understanding I'm not there, and then leaves without eating. My sister and her wife were invited for dinner with me and my husband. I was homesick the week before, so she was laughing and telling us about the boy and how he refused to be served by any other and just waited outside for me. My husband was confused, so my sister explained everything about this customer. My husband was silent the rest of the dinner. When they went home he asked me why I never told him about this customer and that he thought that the guy was being disrespectful. He asked if he knew I was married. I was confused as to why he would say something like that. Then he became angry because I said that he had Down syndrome. He said that there are functioning people with this syndrome and that I was the prejudiced one, not him. I told him that I was aware of that, but this boy in question seemed and appeared to be much younger, and when he started, one of the people working in the day center noticed his behavior and came to check if he was making us uncomfortable and explained that he had the mind of an 8-year-old and is creature of habit. At the time we told them that he was very polite and pleasant to have as a customer. My husband wasn't happy about it. Next week my husband showed up at 7:30 and took that exact table the boy usually takes. When he came he was very flustered and didn't know what to do, so he just stood near my workstation with his sandwich and coffee in hand. I asked him if he wanted me to help him find another table, but my husband was very angry and told the boy to respect me because I'm a married woman and to not come and stare at me again. The boy apologized and he just left and waited outside all confused. I was heartbroken and begged my husband to apologize and to leave the table because the boy is a creature of habit and doesn't really like changes. He said he didn't care because obviously he's in love with me. My sister told my husband about how I got a Valentine's card last year. When I got home my husband said that he makes good money and we don't need my income. He had contacted my sister to ask her to take over my share of the cafe because I didn't need to work. He said he was disappointed because I never told him about my customer or the card he gave me, so I must have thought it was out of line. But it wasn't like that at all. It's just that I get hundreds of customers every day and I don't have to tell my husband about all of them. He said it wasn't the same as someone who's in love with me. Being in my cafe every day and sometimes when I'm alone. This infuriated me, but we somewhat made up, and I thought we would be okay. All that to say the next morning he was almost non-talkative to me. I asked him if he was still mad, and he said he just needed time to think about things. I had no idea what that meant, and I was still pissed at him because of his irrational thinking about this whole situation. Ever since that day, he hasn't really been the same. He doesn't do it all the time, but he will avoid me on certain days where I tell him about a funny story at the restaurant. The spark was slowly fading, and I didn't know what to do about it but resign from it. I had hoped that if I did that, he would be happy and we could move on from this whole stupid ordeal. When I told him the news, he acted happy, but it was obvious that he was faking it in some aspect. At this point, I'm starting to suspect that he is losing feelings for me, as he has seemed to have more frequent late nights at the office. If what I'm thinking he is doing is true, my heart is already shattered. Every time I try to talk to him, he just shuts me down with a lie about how he loves me and everything is fine. I can't make him budge, and I feel like I'm trapped in a hole with no way out. What should I do?